Hello, this is Thinking Out Loud with Ian Currey. Today, I've been looking at things that look fine, but aren't quite right. In our house, tins are important. When homemade goodies need storing, although never for very long, I think we've discussed that before, they're put in these tins and hidden in the kitchen cupboard. There are one or two tins that are very annoying. This one in particular, it looks square, but it isn't. The lid only goes on one way round. Now, why wasn't it made square? Who measured that and decided it was close enough? Come on, let me tell you what I think. Ever since I was a small boy in school, I've had a problem with measurement systems. It's not that I don't understand them, it's just that I always seem to get used to the one system that is going to change and then have to change my brain to something new. In England, growing up, there were 12 pence to 1 shilling and 21 shillings to a guinea. It was a horrible base for math. But somehow we got on with it and we learned the strange way of adding the columns. I'll perhaps talk about money another day, but today, let's just say I had to learn a new way to do things, and when the UK changed over to a decimal currency, I had to learn the new money system. These things just seem to keep happening to me though. I'd become very used to millimeters and kilograms, and then we moved to America, and here feet, inches and pounds are still very much in use. Have you ever wondered where these different measurements come from? Well, I have an old ruler and I kind of like to use this, and I like it because it has a hint of the past hiding in it. These folding measuring sticks are much more popular with carpenters and engineers and tradesmen in Europe than here in America. This one is fun for a couple of reasons. First, it's marked in inches but made in Germany. And other than some plumbing situations, they just don't really use inches in Germany at all. I find that fun. On top of that, there's a bend in the middle of the measuring stick here, and it's a bit like an elbow, isn't it? And that's a very traditional thing too. It's called the L, and it was once a commonly used unit of length, especially again in Germany. Traditionally, it's about 18 inches and has the length from the tip of your finger to your elbow, just like this. The word L means arm and bow, bend, so arm bend or elbow. And this length is known as a cubit elsewhere, and you'll find that especially in the Bible, where you'll find it mentioned a lot. Many measurements were able to be made this way. The span is another one, and it's half a cubit, or L, and it's about 9 inches, and is the distance from the tip of your thumb to the tip of your little finger. There's 2 of them in an L. But my favorite of all is the yard. And usually this was just considered to be 2 cubits, so about 36 inches. But the thing is that once upon a time, by definition, the king had to be involved in this measurement because it was defined as the distance from the tip of the king's nose to the end of his outstretched hand. Now, I can see a problem with that, can't you? If you have a king with a short arm or a small hand, all your measuring standards change. And since you can't go around having everything change every time you get a new king, there has to be some absolutes. A favourite school field trip for me was a visit to Trafalgar Square. And Trafalgar Square is one of 3 places in London where there are metal plates set into the ground or into the wall with standard measurements. Now, some of them you will have never heard of, but in among all the weird and long forgotten units is a standard yard. And so long as the temperature is 62 degrees Fahrenheit, because metal expands when it gets hot, then you can get an accurate check on your yardstick. It's still there today, but it's been quite a long time since I checked on it. I have quite a collection of rulers here, but for most things day to day, any one of them would be just fine and would do the job I expect. Long before such standards were widely in place, a wonderful ship was built in Sweden. It was called the Vasa. It took 2 long years to build and used a very great deal of money. These days it can be seen in a museum in Stockholm. Now, the Vasa is infamous for one thing in particular. 20 minutes into her maiden voyage, she rolled over and sank. There's been speculation on just how this disaster happened, and it's gone on for well over 300 years. But one leading theory comes from how the ship was built. Now, the Vasa is certainly a very impressive ship, and while Swedish engineering is well known for its high quality, if you wanted a ship built in the 1600s, you hired specialists from another shipbuilding country, Holland. And if you wanted the ship to be built completely in 2 years and not a day more, you mixed the Dutch special team with your own homegrown specialists. But when you mix 2 teams like that, language becomes a problem. And it seems that that isn't all that became a problem. I can imagine the Swedish shipbuilders may not have been all that thrilled that the outsiders were coming in to take some of their jobs away. And I can imagine the 2 different opinions would quickly run through the whole program about how to do things and getting to be a problem. After all, both groups were very good at what they did and had presumably been doing it well for many years. In the end, perhaps in part to ease labour tensions and team strife, it looks like the Dutch workers were assigned one side of the ship, while the Swedish the other. One side, the Dutch side, is actually much bigger than the other side, and so much heavier, and this is probably one of the reasons the ship rolled over. But how did this happen? These were experts. Interestingly, I've seen this cheap model in various guises, obviously mass-produced somewhere. It's been called a variety of things, including Katisak, the Vasa, and even as this one, the Mayflower. And just because you change the name doesn't make it anything like any of the ships it's supposed to represent. The Katisak we talked about in a video called Making Choices, with its connection to Hong Kong. That might be a good video to watch again too. Well, the Vasa was very famous, but it was thought it had been lost forever. How you lose a ship is beyond me, but I suppose it was under the water. However, not too long ago they were widening the port entrance to Stockholm and they discovered it. And it was in remarkably good condition, laying right where you would expect to find it, not 20 minutes from where it was built. Now, the Vasa was lifted from its watery grave, I think probably more to get it out of the way than anything, and it was put in a museum. And in the wreckage there were 4 rulers, and they belonged 2 to the Dutch and 2 to the Swedes. Now, all 4 rulers were marked in inches, with 12 inches equaling a foot. But the Swedish inches were slightly shorter than the Dutch. In fact, compared to the Dutch foot, the Swedish foot was a whole inch shorter. Now, neither was wrong, and I'm sure both teams of engineers considered their ruler to be right. I mean, after all, they'd been using these rulers all their lives, and quite possibly their fathers before them. And they'd used the same tools quite successfully to build ships and whatever else. And if anybody noticed the difference, they would have assumed the other team's rulers were wrong. If you add in the obvious language barrier and other team tensions that were doubtless going on, you have a situation that has inevitable consequences. Now, neither team of workers would have intentionally used something they believed to be wrong. But equally, without having an absolute reference, well, like the one found in Trafalgar Square, just because you believe what you had to be a true guide would not actually make it a true guide. So you can see the parallel with everyday life hiding there, I'm quite sure. So often these days we're presented with a range of facts that can't all be accurate since they differ so drastically. Now, if you'd been one of the shipbuilders and had been curious and honestly thought, I'll check this, who would you have checked with? And the places you would check would be the places you knew. So the Dutch engineers would have checked with their experts in Holland, while the Swedish engineers would have checked with theirs in Stockholm. And both would have received assurances, oh yes, your rulers are indeed accurate, and they must be. It must be the others that are wrong. But can you see that failing to resolve these obvious discrepancies eventually led to a tragic loss? Now today I have a couple of verses from the Bible for you that deal with this kind of thing. The first is found in Proverbs chapter 20, and here God is talking not just about accidental inaccuracies, but those that are either intentional or known about and tolerated. False weights and unequal measures. The Lord detests double standards of every kind. Do you see those words, of every kind, there at the end? The second place I want to look is a favorite place in Philippians chapter 4. This is one of my Trafalgar Square accuracy testers. And this is where I go if I want to know if a way of behaving or believing or thinking is right. And I go to this verse and see if it measures up. And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you. Everything you heard from me and saw me doing, oh, that's a really hard standard to measure up to, isn't it? Who do you know that you can say that about? Can people say that about you? But at the start of this section, Paul says, fix your thoughts on what is true. Are you really sure your ruler is the one that is right? Does what you believe fit in with all of the other things Paul lists there? Honorable, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, worthy of praise. How we do things and how we say things matters very much. You could say the journey to make the Vasa took much longer than the finished product ever lasted. For those workers that spent all that time working on the ship, they were left thinking of their co-workers that may have drowned as the ship sank, or wishing they had made sure what they believed to be true was real. Now I should probably work out if this model is the Vasa, the Mayflower, though that was shorter and fatter, I think, or perhaps it's the Cutty Sark. Perhaps you can tell me which ship you think it is in the comments below. If you haven't already done so, subscribe and click the like button. Until next time, goodbye.